Claire Donovan stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. 15 years of marriage had changed her, crow's feet around her eyes, silver strands threading through her chestnut hair, and a heaviness in her gaze that hadn't been there when she'd first said, "I do." Tonight was their anniversary, and Michael had insisted on dinner at Eloise's, the upscale French restaurant where he'd proposed all those years ago. She'd been surprised by the invitation. For the past 2 years, their marriage had felt like a house with all its lights slowly going out, room by room, until they were just shadows passing each other in the dark. "We should leave in 10 minutes, Michael called from downstairs, his voice carrying that brisk efficiency that had become his default tone with her, the same voice he used for conference calls and speaking to waiters. "Almost ready," Claire replied, applying a final touch of lipstick. She'd chosen a dress she knew he'd once loved, back when his eyes still lingered on her. The navy silk caught the light as she moved, and for a moment, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe whatever had been lost between them could be found again. The drive to the restaurant was filled with small talk about Michael's law firm and their daughter Lily, away for her first year at college. "Jack Reynolds is still gunning for senior partner," Michael said, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "But Henderson likes my approach on the Westlake merger." Claire made appropriate noises of interest, though she'd heard variations of the same conversation for years. Once, she'd found his ambition attractive, the sharp suits, the confident stride, the way he could command a room. Now, she wondered when ambition had turned into absence. Eloise's hadn't changed. The same soft lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and waiters who moved like they were performing a carefully choreographed dance. The maitre d' led them to a corner table, not the one where Michael had proposed, Claire noticed, but she didn't mention it. "You look beautiful tonight," Michael said as they settled into their seats, and Claire felt a flutter of surprise. When was the last time he'd really looked at her? Said something that wasn't perfunctory or practical. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy, as if they were on a first date. "You don't look so bad yourself." Something in his expression shifted, a softening around the eyes, perhaps. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, reaching across the table to take her hand. His wedding band caught the light. "About us. About how things have been." Claire's heart quickened. They'd been avoiding this conversation for so long that it felt dangerous now, like opening a door neither of them knew what lay behind. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "We've drifted," Michael said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I know that's partly my fault. The firm, the hours." "It's not just you," Claire said quietly. "We both stopped trying somewhere along the way." The waiter appeared with champagne Claire didn't remember Michael ordering. As the bubbles rose in their flutes, Michael raised his glass. "To us," he said, holding her gaze with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. "And to starting over." Starting over. The words hung between them like a promise, and for the first time in months, maybe years, Claire felt hope bloom in her chest. They talked through dinner about real things, not just schedules and household logistics, but dreams and regrets. Michael mentioned a second honeymoon, perhaps to Maine where they'd gone after their wedding, to reconnect away from the distractions of everyday life. "I'd like that," Claire said, meaning it. A fresh start. By the time they returned home, something had shifted between them. Michael's kiss at the door wasn't the perfunctory peck it had become, but something deeper, a remembrance of what they'd once been to each other. That night, they made love for the first time in months, and afterward, Claire lay awake, watching Michael sleep and allowing herself to believe that perhaps they hadn't lost each other after all. The next morning, Claire woke to an empty bed and the sound of the shower running. A note on Michael's pillow read, "Early meeting. Didn't want to wake you. Last night was perfect. Love you." The 3 words he'd stopped saying regularly somewhere along the way. With a smile, Claire stretched and decided to surprise him by making a real breakfast instead of his usual protein bar on the go. As she headed downstairs, she remembered the insurance documents she needed to sign for Lily's college apartment. Michael had said he'd brought them home in his briefcase. His briefcase sat on the entry table where he always left it. Claire hesitated only a moment before opening it. They'd never been the type of couple to have secrets from each other. At least, they hadn't been in the beginning. The insurance papers were there, neatly paper-clipped together, but as she pulled them out, something else caught her eye. An envelope from Reynolds Travel Agency. Inside were 2 airline tickets to Bali, dated for next month, during the time Michael had suggested they go to Maine. Only one ticket had Michael's name on it. The other was for Emily Westbrook, his colleague from the firm. Claire's hands trembled as she stared at the tickets. Maybe there was an explanation. A business trip he hadn't mentioned. But why suggest Maine? And why was her stomach tightening with a dread that felt horribly like certainty? She dug deeper, her movements becoming frantic. Beneath a folder of case notes, she found another envelope. This one contained divorce papers, already signed by Michael, dated to be filed the day after their supposed trip to Maine. Not a business trip then. An escape. A new life planned with someone else, while she was being fed pretty lies about starting over. The shower upstairs stopped. Claire quickly returned everything to its place, her movements mechanical, her mind racing. When Michael came downstairs, briefcase in hand and not a hint of guilt on his face, she forced herself to smile. "I made coffee," she said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded when her world was collapsing. "Thanks, but I'm running late." He kissed her cheek, the gesture now obscene in its casualness. "I'll call you later." As the door closed behind him, Claire sank onto a kitchen stool, the truth settling around her like broken glass. Last night wasn't about saving their marriage. It had been about managing her, keeping her complacent while he prepared his exit. The second honeymoon suggestion. A way to get her out of the house, perhaps, while he finalized arrangements. Or worse, a final memory to ease his conscience? Claire's hands curled into fists as the initial shock gave way to a cold, clarifying anger. Michael thought he had everything planned perfectly. He thought she was predictable, manageable, a problem to be solved rather than a person being betrayed. He'd underestimated her. They'd met in law school, before she'd put her career on hold to raise Lily. She might have stepped away from the legal world, but she hadn't forgotten how to strategize, how to find leverage, how to win. If Michael wanted to play games, he'd soon discover she was a far more formidable opponent than he'd anticipated. He believed he was 3 steps ahead of her. By the time this was over, he'd realize he hadn't even been in the same race. Claire picked up her phone and began to make calls. First, to her old law school roommate Sarah, now a divorce attorney known for her ruthlessness in high-asset cases. Then to a private investigator recommended by Sarah. By noon, she'd initiated a forensic accounting of their finances and requested a complete background check on Emily Westbrook. When Michael called that evening to say he'd be working late, Claire's voice betrayed nothing but supportive understanding. "Don't worry about me," she said, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound like the trusting wife he believed her to be. "I'm just looking at some options for Maine." "You're the best," Michael replied, the endearment landing like acid on her skin. "No," Claire thought as she hung up, steel replacing the heartbreak in her eyes. "But I will be. For the next 2 weeks, Claire lived a double life. On the surface, she was the rekindled wife, enthusiastically planning their trip to coastal Maine, suggesting romantic inns and seafood restaurants, while Michael nodded with convincing interest. Beneath this performance, she was methodically building her case, piece by damning piece. The private investigator, Dennis Mercer, was worth every penny of his exorbitant fee. Within days, he provided surveillance photos of Michael and Emily meeting for lunch, their hands lingering too long during what was clearly not a business discussion. There were receipts for jewelry Claire had never received and hotel rooms in the city despite Michael claiming to be away on business trips. Most valuable was evidence that Michael had been quietly liquidating assets and funneling money into accounts Claire had no knowledge of, a clear attempt to hide marital property before filing for divorce. "It's not uncommon," Sarah told her over coffee in her downtown office, sliding the financial reports across the desk. "He's been preparing for this for at least 8 months. The good news is that it's all traceable and highly frowned upon by the courts." Claire stared at the papers, each number and transaction date a small betrayal. 8 months, she repeated. "While I was planning Lily's college send-off and worrying about whether we should remodel the kitchen." Sarah reached across the desk to squeeze her hand. "I know it feels personal, but try to see it as what it is, a legal strategy and not a very smart one. He got sloppy because he underestimated you. That's his first mistake." "What's his second?" Claire asked, gathering the documents into her bag. Sarah's smile was razor-sharp. "Thinking you wouldn't fight back." That evening, Michael brought home Chinese takeout and a bottle of Claire's favorite wine. "I thought we deserved a quiet night in," he said, his smile so genuine that for a disorienting moment, Claire questioned everything. Was she wrong? Had she misinterpreted? But then she remembered the plane tickets, the divorce papers, the secret accounts draining their joint finances. "That sounds perfect," she replied, smiling back while calculating how much evidence she could gather during their upcoming second honeymoon. The Maine trip was no longer a painful mockery, but an opportunity. Michael had inadvertently given her 5 uninterrupted days to document their assets and plant seeds of doubt between him and his accomplice. 2 days before they were set to leave for Maine, Claire met with Gary Wong, Lily's computer science professor and an old family friend. "It's definitely high-end encryption," he said, examining Michael's laptop while he was at work, and Claire had borrowed it to organize photos for their trip. "But nothing I can't help with." "You're sure this is just about recovering family photos?" Claire nodded, the lie coming easily now. "Michael accidentally deleted them, and he's too proud to admit it. I want to surprise him with a memory book for our anniversary." Gary worked his magic, and by the time he left, Claire had access to Michael's personal email, financial accounts, and text messages. What she found that night made her physically ill. Intimate exchanges between Michael and Emily going back over a year, detailed discussions of their future together in Bali. "Away from everything that reminds me of my old life," Michael had written, and calculated conversations about how to minimize what Claire would receive in the divorce. "She's never shown much interest in the finances," Michael had written. "It shouldn't be hard to keep most of the investments off the table." Emily's response had been even more galling. "Just keep playing the attentive husband until everything's in place. From what you've told me, she'll be so grateful for the attention she won't look too closely at anything else." Claire read the messages twice, then 3 times, letting the humiliation and rage wash through her until it crystallized into something cold and purposeful. They thought she was desperate for affection, easily manipulated by a few kind words and gestures. They thought she was pathetic. By morning, Claire had formulated her plan. She would go to Maine, play the adoring wife return to the fold, and use every moment to strengthen her position. Michael wanted a clean break with minimal financial damage. He would soon discover that betrayal came with a much higher price tag than honesty ever would have. The coastal haven, it was everything the website had promised. A restored Victorian with panoramic ocean views and a reputation for discreet, attentive service. Their suite featured a 4-poster bed, a private balcony, and enough romantic touches to convince anyone watching that this was indeed a couple rekindling their marriage. "It's perfect," Claire said as they settled in, and she meant it, though not for the reasons Michael assumed. The inn's manager, charmed by Claire's story of a second honeymoon after difficult times, had promised to provide documentation of all their expenditures, evidence of the lavish lifestyle Michael would soon claim they couldn't afford to maintain. The first 2 days were a masterclass in deception. Coastal walks hand in hand, candlelit dinners, and intimate conversations about hopes for their future together. Claire made sure they were seen everywhere as a devoted couple, taking selfies that would later contradict any claim that their marriage had been dead for years. On the 3rd day, while Michael was in the shower, Claire finally executed the most delicate part of her plan. She took his phone, opened his messaging app, and sent a carefully crafted text to Emily. "Having second thoughts about all this. Claire seems different. Maybe we should reconsider our timeline." She deleted the message from a sent folder, knowing Emily would see it, but Michael would have no idea it had been sent. The seed of doubt planted, Claire returned the phone exactly as she'd found it and was innocently reading on the balcony when Michael emerged. "I thought we could drive up the coast today," he suggested. "There's a lighthouse I read about." "I'd love that," Claire said, her smile genuine for the first time in weeks. The game had truly begun. By the time they returned to the inn that evening, Emily had sent 3 increasingly frantic messages. Claire watched Michael's face as he read them, confusion giving way to concern. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice the perfect blend of supportive and unobtrusive. "Just a work thing," Michael replied, thumbs flying as he assured Emily that he had no idea what she was talking about, that nothing had changed. That night, while Michael slept beside her, Claire sent another message from his phone. "I can't talk now. Need time to think. This is bigger than both of us." The next morning, Michael's phone rang while he was getting coffee downstairs. Claire answered sweetly, Michael Donovan's phone. There was a startled silence before Emily spoke, her voice strained with forced professionalism. "This is Emily Westbrook. I need to speak with Michael immediately regarding the Westlake merger." "He's just stepped out," Claire said. "But he mentioned you might call. Something about reconsidering the timeline? He seems really conflicted about the whole situation." Another silence, this one longer and heavy with unspoken questions. "Just tell him to call me as soon as possible." "Of course," Claire promised. "By the way, I've been meaning to thank you for all your hard work with Michael. He says you've been an incredible partner." She could practically hear Emily's discomfort through the phone. That's very kind of you." "Not at all," Claire said warmly. "I'm looking forward to that dinner he promised, the 4 of us. You, me, Michael, and your husband David, isn't it? Michael speaks so highly of him." The lie landed perfectly. Emily's husband was named Thomas, not David, and Claire knew from her research that he was completely unaware of the affair. The implication that Michael had been discussing Emily's husband, perhaps confessing their relationship to him, was calculated to create maximum panic. "I have to go," Emily said abruptly, ending the call. When Michael returned with coffee, Claire handed him his phone with an innocent smile. Emily called about the Westlake merger. She seemed upset. "I told her you'd call her back." Michael's face paled slightly. "You spoke to her?" "Just briefly," Claire said. "Is something wrong with the case?" No, Michael said quickly, already dialing Emily back and stepping onto the balcony for privacy. Claire watched through the window as his expression shifted from confusion to alarm. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she didn't need to. The cracks were forming. By the time they returned home, the foundations of Michael's carefully constructed plan would be thoroughly undermined. The final day in Maine was a study in contrasts, beautiful scenery and exquisite meals juxtaposed with Michael's growing distraction and frequent work calls that left him increasingly agitated. Claire maintained her role flawlessly, expressing concern but never pressing for details, playing the understanding wife while systematically dismantling his escape route. As they packed to leave, Michael's phone chimed with a message that made him freeze. Claire pretended not to notice, but she'd been expecting it. Before bed, she'd sent one final text to Emily from his phone. "We need to postpone Bali. I can't do this to her right now." "Is everything okay?" she asked, folding a sweater with deliberate care. Michael's laugh sounded hollow. "Just work stress. Nothing for you to worry about." "If you say so," Claire replied, zipping her suitcase. "But remember what we talked about, no more barriers between us. We're starting over, remember?" The guilt that flashed across his face was almost worth the pain of the past weeks. Almost. The drive home was quiet, Michael lost in thought while Claire gazed out the window, mentally preparing for the next phase. She'd successfully created discord between the conspirators. Now it was time to confront the betrayal head-on and demonstrate exactly what happened to those who underestimated Claire Donovan. Their house seemed different when they returned. Smaller somehow, as if the knowledge of Michael's betrayal had physically compressed the space they'd shared for 15 years. Claire moved through it with new awareness, noting the photographs that chronicled their life together. The wedding portrait in the entryway, Lily's graduation on the mantel, last summer's family vacation on the refrigerator. Each image now felt like evidence in a case against everything they'd built. Michael retreated to his home office immediately, claiming a work emergency that couldn't wait. Claire unpacked methodically, washing away the fiction of their reconciliation with each garment returned to its proper place. When she heard him on the phone, voice lowered but words occasionally rising in clear frustration, she smiled to herself. Let him scramble to salvage his plans. The divorce papers remained unfiled, the Bali tickets unused on Emily's coffee table, Claire had. Ted's salmon with roasted vegetables and the expensive Pinot Noir he saved for special occasions. She set the dining room table with their wedding china, lit candles, and waited. "What's all this?" Michael asked when he finally emerged from his office, tension evident in the tight line of his shoulders. "I thought we should celebrate," Claire said, pouring the wine with a steady hand. "The trip was exactly what we needed. Don't you think?" Michael's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It was great. I'm sorry I've been distracted since we got back. This Westlake merger is becoming complicated." "Emily having trouble with the documentation?" Claire asked innocently, taking a sip of wine. Something flickered across Michael's face, suspicion, perhaps, quickly masked. Among other things. They ate in a silence broken only by Claire's occasional comments about the inn or the lighthouse they visited. Michael responded with appropriate noises of agreement, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. When his phone buzzed for the third time during dinner, Claire set down her fork with deliberate precision. "You should get that," she said. "It might be important." Michael hesitated, then picked up his phone, frowning at the screen. "I need to make a quick call. Client emergency." "Of course," Claire said agreeably. The moment he left the room, she moved swiftly, retrieving the divorce papers from where she'd hidden them after photographing every page. She placed them beside his plate and resumed eating as if nothing had changed. When Michael returned minutes later, his gaze immediately locked on the papers. He froze in the doorway, color draining from his face. "Is it a client emergency?" Claire asked calmly. "Or is Emily getting impatient about Bali?" Michael's shock gave way to calculation. She could almost see him weighing possible explanations, excuses, denials. "Claire, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," she interrupted, her tone conversational despite the fury simmering beneath. "You've always been good at explanations. But before you construct some elaborate narrative, you should know that I've seen the airline tickets. I've read your emails. I know about the accounts you've been hiding assets in. I know everything, Michael." He sank into his chair, the practiced confidence of a high-powered attorney evaporating in the face of irrefutable evidence. "How long have you known?" "Since the morning after you suggested we start over," Claire said, the words sharp with contempt. "Quite a performance, by the way. For a moment, I actually believed you." Michael ran a hand through his hair, visibly recalibrating. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." Claire laughed, the sound brittle in the candlelit room. "No, I imagine not. You preferred the version where I remained clueless until you were safely in Bali with your girlfriend, half our assets hidden away, and these papers," she tapped the divorce filing, "already processed through the courts." "It's not that simple," Michael began, his lawyer's instinct to control the narrative asserting itself. "Our marriage has been over for years, Claire. We've been going through the motions. Emily and I." "Stop." Claire held up a hand. "I'm not interested in your justifications. I'm not even particularly interested in Emily, though I do wonder if she knows your history. Did you tell her how you left your first-year associate for me? Or how before that you cheated on your college girlfriend with her roommate? Patterns repeat, Michael. Emily should understand what she's signing up for." His expression hardened. "What do you want, Claire? Money? The house? Just tell me so we can end this civilly." Claire smiled, a cold curl of lips that held no warmth. "What I want is for you to understand exactly what your little scheme has cost you. Not just emotionally or morally, but financially and professionally." She reached into the folder beside her plate and withdrew a stack of documents, financial records, surveillance photos, transcripts of incriminating emails. "While you were planning your escape, I was building a case. One that documents your deliberate concealment of marital assets, your misuse of firm resources to conduct your affair, and your attempt to defraud me in divorce proceedings that you initiated under false pretenses." Michael stared at the evidence, professional concern beginning to override personal discomfort. "You wouldn't destroy my career over this. Think about Lily." "I am thinking about Lily," Claire replied, her voice steady. "I'm thinking about the example I set for her by refusing to be deceived and discarded. I'm thinking about teaching her that actions have consequences, regardless of how powerful or privileged the person committing them might be." She slid another document across the table, her own divorce filing, prepared by Sarah and significantly more comprehensive than Michael's version. "You have a choice. We can do this my way. Equitable division of all assets, including those you've attempted to hide, full financial transparency, and a settlement that acknowledges my contributions to your career and our family. Or we can do it through the courts, where I will be forced to present evidence that would interest not only the judge, but also the Bar Association and the managing partners at your firm." The thread hung between them, its implications clear. Michael's career, built on a reputation for ethical conduct and sound judgment, would not survive the public revelation of his deception, not in a profession where trust was paramount. "You're blackmailing me," he said, his voice low with anger and newfound respect. I'm negotiating, Claire corrected him. Something you taught me to do effectively during our first year of marriage. Remember those mock trials we used to stage in our apartment? You always said I had a natural talent for finding leverage. For a moment, Michael looked at her as if seeing her for the first time in years, not as the comfortable, predictable wife he'd outgrown, but as the formidable opponent he'd forgotten she could be. What happens to Emily in this scenario? That depends on her, Claire said with a shrug. If she cooperates with the forensic accounting process and returns any gifts purchased with our joint funds, she can fade quietly back to her life. If not, she let the implication hang unfinished. Michael's phone buzzed again. Emily, no doubt, still reeling from the doubt Claire had strategically sown during their trip. He ignored it, his attention fully on the woman across the table. Why did you wait? He asked finally. You could have confronted me the moment you found the papers. Why go through with the trip, the pretense? For the same reason you suggested starting over instead of simply telling me the truth, Claire replied. Strategic advantage. Besides, I needed time to ensure my position was unassailable. She stood, gathering the dishes with calm efficiency. You have until tomorrow to decide. My terms or the courts. Either way, Michael, this ends on my terms, not yours. As she walked toward the kitchen, Michael called after her, a note of desperation finally breaking through his composure. Claire, wait. We should talk about this. 15 years of marriage deserves more than an ultimatum. Claire turned, her expression unreadable. It deserved more than a plane ticket to Bali with your mistress, too. Funny how we don't always get what we deserve. That night, Claire slept in the guest room, the door firmly locked against any midnight attempts at persuasion. She listened to Michael pacing downstairs, making calls in hushed, urgent tones, the architect of his perfect escape, watching the structure collapse. Around 2 a.m, the front door opened and closed. Through the window, Claire watched him drive away, likely seeking refuge with Emily while he strategized his next move. She didn't fear his return with some countermeasure. The evidence was too solid, her position too secure. She had enlisted allies who understood the legal and personal dimensions of betrayal. Sarah, who had experienced her own painful divorce. Dennis, whose investigation skills were fueled by a profound sense of justice. Gary, whose technological expertise was guided by his protective feelings toward Lily, who had been like a daughter to him over years of family friendship. When dawn broke, Claire was already awake, preparing for the day with the clarity of purpose that comes from absolute certainty. Michael's choice, compliance or destruction, wasn't really a choice at all, and they both knew it. His legal training would eventually overcome his wounded ego, and he would accept her terms, if only to preserve what remained of his career and reputation. She was proven right when he returned at 8 o'clock, unshaven and grim-faced, a folder of his own tucked under his arm. I've reviewed your proposal, he said without preamble. I have some amendments. Claire gestured to the kitchen table, where coffee waited. I expected you would. The negotiation that followed was almost amicable in its professional detachment. Michael attempted to secure certain assets, his vintage car collection, the vacation property in Aspen, but yielded on the larger financial points when Claire simply recited the evidence that would be presented should they proceed to court. By noon, they had reached an agreement that would leave Claire financially secure and Michael professionally intact, though significantly less wealthy than he had planned to be in his new life. The Bali tickets would be canceled, the hidden accounts dissolved and properly divided, and the divorce would proceed without accusations of fraud or professional misconduct. I'll have Sarah draft the final agreement, Claire said, gathering the documents spread across the table. You should plan to move out by the end of the week. Michael nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. As he stood to leave, he paused, a question clearly weighing on him. Did you ever love me, or was that part of your strategy too? The question caught Claire off guard, not because it was difficult to answer, but because it revealed how completely Michael had rewritten their history to justify his betrayal. In his revised narrative, their marriage had always been transactional, loveless, a convenient arrangement rather than a choice made with their whole hearts. I loved you for 14 years, she said finally. You loved me for maybe 10. The rest is just details. He flinched as if she'd struck him, perhaps recognizing the truth in her assessment. Without another word, he left the kitchen, and Claire listened to his footsteps retreating upstairs, where he would begin the process of dismantling his life in their home. Later that afternoon, while Michael was meeting with his own attorney to review the settlement, Claire drove to Emily's apartment building. She had no intention of confronting the other woman. Nothing productive would come from such an encounter. Instead, she parked across the street and waited, watching as Emily eventually emerged, shoulders hunched against an imaginary wind, eyes scanning the street as if expecting an ambush. Claire felt no satisfaction in the other woman's evident distress, only a hollow acknowledgement that Emily, too, had been manipulated by Michael's practiced charm and promises. In another life, they might have warned each other, prevented this collision of hearts and futures. In this one, they were merely passing players in each other's stories, connected by a man who had failed them both. As Emily drove away, Claire started her own car, putting the apartment building and all it represented firmly in her rearview mirror. Her focus now was on reconstruction, not of her marriage, which had crumbled beyond repair, but of her life as an individual rather than half of a couple. There would be painful conversations with Lily, awkward explanations to friends, decisions about whether to keep the house filled with 15 years of memories. But there would also be freedom. To rediscover the ambitious law student she'd been before marriage and motherhood had redirected her path, to define success on her own terms rather than through the reflected glory of Michael's career, to build relationships based on genuine connection rather than convenience or obligation. Claire drove home, not to the house she'd shared with Michael, but to Sarah's garden apartment, where a spare room had been prepared for her first steps into independence. Tomorrow would bring more negotiations, more painful dismantling of the life she'd believed in. Today, she granted herself permission to grieve what had been lost while acknowledging the strength she'd found in its absence. As she unpacked the single suitcase she'd brought, just enough for a new beginning, her phone chimed with a text from Lily. Dad called. Said you two are separating. What's happening? Claire sighed, sitting on the edge of the unfamiliar bed. This was the conversation she'd been dreading most. Explaining to their daughter that the family foundation she'd taken for granted was irreparably cracked. Not wanting Lily to hear Michael's version first, Claire dialed her number. Mom, Lily answered immediately, her voice tight with concern. Dad sounded weird. He said you're getting divorced, but wouldn't explain why. Are you okay? I'm okay, Claire said, surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. It's complicated, sweetheart. Your father and I have decided to end our marriage. It wasn't a decision either of us made lightly. Half-truth, Claire thought, but necessary. Lily didn't need to know the uglier details, at least not yet. She didn't need her image of her father tarnished by his weakest moments. But you guys seemed fine at Christmas, Lily protested. And Dad said you just went Maine together. Sometimes people drift apart in ways that aren't obvious from the outside, Claire explained carefully. The important thing for you to know is that we both love you, and this doesn't change that in any way. The conversation continued, Lily cycling through confusion, anger, and reluctant acceptance. By its end, Claire had promised to visit campus the following weekend, giving them time for a longer, in-person discussion about what the divorce would mean practically for their family's future. As she hung up, Claire felt the weight of the day pressing down on her. She had won, if victory could be measured by favorable divorce terms and the prevention of Michael's planned deception. But victory felt hollow in the face of Lily's distress and the inescapable acknowledgement that a chapter of her life that had defined her for 15 years was now definitively closed. Sarah knocked gently on the open door, a glass of wine in each hand. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering one to Claire. "First day is always the hardest." Claire accepted the glass gratefully. "Does it get easier?" "Not easier," Sarah said, settling into a chair by the window. "Different. You start building something new, and eventually, the new construction takes up more space in your mind than the demolition." Claire nodded, taking a sip of wine and letting the smooth warmth of it remind her that small pleasures remained even in the midst of larger pain. "I keep thinking about that dinner," she admitted, "when he said he wanted to start over. For a few hours, I believed him completely. What does that say about me?" "It says you're human," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We all want to believe the best of the people we've chosen to love. That's not weakness, Claire. It's hope. And hope, even misplaced hope, takes courage." They sat in companionable silence as evening descended, casting long shadows across the unfamiliar room. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. More legal discussions, more emotional hurdles, more reconstructing of a life Claire had thought was settled. But for now, she allowed herself to simply exist in this moment of transition, neither entirely broken by what had happened nor fully healed, but somewhere in the necessary in-between where growth began. When Sarah eventually left to prepare dinner, Claire opened her laptop and, for the first time in years, navigated to the website of her old law firm. The careers page listed an opening for a legal consultant with flexibility for those returning to practice after an extended absence. Claire bookmarked the page, not yet ready to apply, but unwilling to dismiss the possibility. Michael had been right about one thing: they did need to start over. Just not in the way he had intended. For weeks after discovering Michael's betrayal, Claire sat across from Sarah in her downtown office, surrounded by stacks of financial documents. The air conditioner hummed quietly in the background as they finalized the divorce settlement that would dismantle 15 years of shared life. "Henderson called from Michael's firm," Sarah said, sliding a document across the polished mahogany desk. "They've agreed to our terms on the retirement accounts. Michael's trying to save face professionally, which works in our favor." Claire nodded, feeling a strange detachment as she signed her name. The initial rage had crystallized into something colder and more focused, a determination to emerge from this betrayal not just intact, but stronger. "And the house. All yours," Sarah confirmed with a satisfied smile. Along with the art collection he claimed was just decorative, despite the appraisals showing otherwise. Claire allowed herself a small smile. Michael had always dismissed her interest in collecting emerging artists, calling it a hobby until those same artists gained recognition and their works quadrupled in value. That evening, Claire returned to what was now solely her home. She walked through each room methodically, reclaiming spaces that had been shadows of themselves during the final years of her marriage. In the master bedroom, she stripped away Michael's remaining belongings, donating his abandoned clothes to charity and replacing the mattress where they'd shared so many hollow nights. Lily called as Claire was repainting the study, transforming Michael's dark mahogany sanctuary into a light-filled space where she could eventually practice law again. "Dad's miserable," Lily reported from her dorm room, her voice a mixture of concern and confusion. "He keeps saying everything happened so fast, that he made one mistake and his whole life fell apart." Claire set down her paintbrush, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes what looks like one mistake is actually the final step in a journey that started long ago. She wouldn't poison Lily against her father, but neither would she shoulder blame for the collapse of what Michael had already destroyed. After hanging up, Claire stepped onto the back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in defiant streaks of pink and gold. For the first time since discovering the plane tickets, she felt the tightness in her chest begin to loosen. There was pain still, of course, the sharp sting of betrayal, the dull ache of dreams abandoned, but beneath it all, a growing sense of possibility that felt remarkably like freedom. 1 year later, Claire stood before the gleaming glass doors of Harrington and West, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her tailored navy suit. At 45, she had rejoined the legal world, not as a junior associate restarting from scratch, but as a specialist in family law with a unique perspective on marital dissolution that clients found refreshingly honest. Claire Donovan, a Fami's newest rising star. Hardly rising, Claire laughed, accepting his embrace. Just resurfacing after a long dive. The Montgomery case settlement says otherwise, James countered, guiding her toward the elevators. 3 other firms tried and failed before you stepped in. The partners are impressed. Pride warmed Claire's chest as they ascended to the conference room where she would be formally welcomed to the partnership track. The journey back to professional life hadn't been easy. Countless hours of studying to update her knowledge, weekends sacrificed to rebuild her network, doubts that whispered she'd been away too long to matter again. But with each case, each small victory, her confidence had solidified into certainty. Later that evening, Claire hosted a small celebration at her home, now truly hers in both deed and spirit. Sarah raised a toast to new beginnings while Lily, home from college for the weekend, beamed with pride beside her mother. Even Michael had sent flowers with a card that read simply, "Congratulations. Well deserved." As her guests mingled in the garden, Claire slipped away to her study, once Michael's dark retreat, now her light-filled sanctuary. On the wall hung a single photograph, not from her marriage, but from law school graduation, showing a younger Claire with determined eyes and boundless ambition. Beside it sat a framed copy of her first settlement as lead counsel, a reminder that what had been paused could be reclaimed. Her phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. Opening it, she found a news article about Emily Westbrook accepting a position at a firm in Chicago, and beneath it a single line. "Thought you should know. He doesn't change. Thank you." Claire deleted the message without responding. That chapter was closed, the lessons learned, the scars healed into wisdom. She rejoined her guests, accepting congratulations and fielding good-natured questions about whether she'd defend or prosecute in divorces. Neither, she answered with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked through fire and emerged tempered rather than destroyed. "I advocate for clarity and dignity when lives are being rebuilt. Sometimes endings aren't failures, they're necessary beginnings." As stars appeared in the evening sky, Claire raised her glass to friends who had become family, to challenges that had become opportunities, and to the woman she had rediscovered beneath the ashes of betrayal, stronger, wiser, and finally, genuinely free. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share with a friend who needs to hear about resilience and reinvention. Comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever had to start over after betrayal? What gave you the strength to move forward?